Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Shine a Light on series. Today, we'll be shining a light on commuting with Daniela Balaguera. Welcome, Daniela.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm just so excited to talk about commuting with you and just have this conversation.
Yes, also excited to chat about this. To start, do you mind just giving us a brief introduction to who you are?
Yeah, so I am Daniela and I recently graduated from Santa Clara University with a BA in communication and a minor in management information systems. And when I was in college, I was pretty involved with lots of different organizations and stuff on campus that related to, my interests and my passions. And now that I'm out of college, I'm trying to still find different communities and different ways to still explore all of those passions and interests that I have. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'm also excited to chat with you about this today. I would love to know what were your experiences with commuting overall, now that you've graduated and can reflect on it a bit. How did it go, would you say, at a high level?
I think for me, overall, it was actually a pretty good experience. Like anything else, it was definitely a lot of pros and cons that are involved with commuting. I think the things that I really loved about commuting is definitely the free housing, so I didn't have to worry about paying rent or trying to find a way to like pay for all of those different bills because I was still living at home with my parents and my entire family. And because I was with my family, I also got a lot of free food because I still had, my mom's cooking for 4 years, which I absolutely love. So I'm so happy that I still got that because I think I wouldn't have survived if I didn't have that. And I think another thing that I really just loved is just kind of having a space to be alone if I needed it. So when I was at Santa Clara, I feel like it's very easy to have people kind of like invade your space a little bit because you're always everywhere. But I knew that if I wanted to be alone for a little bit, I could just go home and no one can really bother me because I'm just gonna be here by myself. And I just really love that I got to be like outside of the SCU bubble as well because I would always be with like my sister or at the grocery store or at work and all this different stuff. So I wasn't always just with college students. But the cons, I think there was definitely like the parking pass. I was not a fan of like having to pay just to park. I probably hated that. That was probably the worst thing. And also just like the time. There's so much time that's involved with commuting because you have to plan everything and then you have to wake up like 2+ hours to get ready and then like to drive as well and then kind of move your schedule around all of that and then also just pay for gas. So I think those were all the big things that just completely were the worst part of commuting. But I think overall, I did have a pretty good experience. So I'm really thankful for that.
Yes, I also commuted for a bit of college. I lived on campus for a bit of college too, but definitely agree with your pros and your cons. And I think commuting in general has its own misconceptions, or I've heard people make assumptions about me or my commuting experience. And even when I wasn't commuting, I feel like it's not like people would talk poorly necessarily about commuters, but I think people have assumptions about sort of how they operate. Are there any myths or misconceptions that you've heard about commuters, and how would you respond to them?
One of the things that I've heard a lot was that commuters were just afraid to leave home. And that's definitely not the case because I know a lot of commuters at SCU and a majority of them are not at all scared of leaving home or doing anything like that. They're mostly commuting because of either financial reasons or maybe some sort of family obligation. And I feel like that's the case for a majority of commuters just anywhere around the world. So I think that's like a big misconception that people have. And I think another one might be that you don't really have like real world experience in any way because you're still living at home and like with your family. But I know that what I've been doing as a commuter, I'm going to be doing when I work a full time job because I'm going to have to, plan my day, plan for traffic, get ready, try and figure out my schedule. If I have to pick up someone or like if I have kids or something, I need to figure out like their schedule and plan it with mine. So I think I'm already a little bit prepared for that just because I already had to do that as a college student and being a commuter.
For sure. Yes. And I agree with you actually that I think commuters are sort of set up well for the real world, with exception to the last, year and a half, and we've all been working and doing things remotely. Typically, like you wake up, you commute somewhere, and then you commute back home at the end of the day. So people who like have always lived in their own bubble maybe actually don't have what one would call like real world insight. So that's a good point. I agree with you there. And I'll add to this list of misconceptions. I think there's even more. I'm sure we could go into it. But I have heard before, or I've been asked even, like, isn't it hard to make friends like, if you're a commuter? I think people have this assumption that you can't make friends easily, which in some ways I see that case honestly because you have to travel home at some point, right? Like you can't stay out super late necessarily with friends and then commute like in the middle of the night, especially if you live with your parents, which I did as well. To explain yourself to your parents like super late at night, that's not super fun. So it could be hard to make friends if you can't stay around campus during like after hours because everyone's working during the day typically, right? So after hours is when people go out and have dinner and actually hang out like human to human. What are your experiences with this? Do you want to debunk this myth as well?
Yeah, I know for me, that was one of the biggest fears I had, as a freshman and knowing that I was going to be commuting at Santa Clara. Because I thought to myself, oh no, I'm going to be so lonely and I'm going to have no friends and I'm going to cry to myself every single night. And it's just going to be the worst experience of my life. Because in high school, I just like knew almost everyone because we were really small and I was there all the time. And I was like, that's not going to be the same in college. And so I was just terrified. But for me, I think that I was still able to make lots of friends. And I just kind of worked on, getting really involved with campus. And I feel like most commuters have to force themselves in a way to just be really involved and to talk to others because that's the only way that you can really make friends is by making sure that the time that you are on campus, you're like really involved and you're talking to people because if not, like you said, most people usually are, hanging out and stuff, in the after hours, after 5, after 6, when you might want to get home because the traffic is starting to get bad. So you really have to make the most of it while you're there. And so I think that's one of the biggest things. So I think it is a little bit more of a challenge than if you were living on campus, but I feel like you just have to put a little bit more effort in order to make those friends.
Hmm. Definitely. Yeah, I agree with you. So I'm curious, what would be your number one piece of advice to any commuter student? I feel like there's so much you could say, but I'm curious of your top piece.
I think my top advice would probably be that you need to get out of your comfort zone and, try new things. I think probably some of the best memories that I have had while at Santa Clara were from different events or different clubs or different things that I was involved with that at first I was a little bit hesitant to join or to go to, but then it turned out being like something that I absolutely loved and probably some of my favorite things. So I think that's something that commuters should try and do is just making sure that you aren't a little bit afraid to do other things because that's also how you grow as a person and that's a good skill you're going to need in life in general. So might as well start now.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And I think along the same lines, perhaps I might recommend to any commuter to maybe sacrifice like at least one day of bad traffic just to hang out with your friends after hours because it's just different, once it hits dinner time. Like everyone's different, the mood is different. So sometimes you have to sacrifice if you can, going home early to actually like create relationships at school. What would you say to anyone who's debating whether or not to commute to college? Because this is something I went through too, and I don't know if you went through this as well, but obviously, if you have the opportunity um, and the funds, because it is more expensive to live on campus, but you're close enough to commute, then this whole debate comes up of should I or should I not do it? And I don't think even today we're arguing that you should commute if you're super close to a school. There are benefits and there are perks. So, what would you advise someone who's sort of on the fence?
I think the number one thing that someone has to do if they're debating whether or not they want to commute is honestly just make a pros and cons list of both options, or if there's a third option too, just kind of like looking at everything and then trying to figure out what makes the most sense. You know, sometimes people choose to commute because it's financially the best option, but maybe you can afford to, take out a loan or spend a little bit more money to be on campus, or maybe it just makes more sense to do one or the other. So I think you really just have to think of what is best for you and your specific situation, because commuting is also not for everyone, and living on campus isn't necessarily for every person either. So you also got to look at like your personality and what you think works best for you. So just kind of taking a deep dive at that is going to be the best.
Yes. A good old pros and cons list, I think, is always a good idea. Very
I totally
nice.
agree.
Right. Already, my last question for you. Do you have any last words of wisdom for any commuters or potential commuters? I know you've given a lot of wisdom already, but any last words?
I think the biggest thing is just to make the most out of your college experience. I think, just like we've mentioned about the different misconceptions and things like that, people are afraid that because you're a commuter, you might not have a good time at college. And that's definitely not the case. I think it's ultimately just up to you and what you put into your college experience. I feel like if you work hard on it, you're going to enjoy your time there. And if you have a good attitude, it's also going to be a really great time. But if you do the opposite, you're just going to be miserable. So just, have a good attitude and make the most of it, because you do only go to college a few times, maybe like bachelor's, maybe your master's, maybe your PhD. So just make the most of it.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you, Daniela. It was great chatting with you as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And to anyone tuning in, thank you for joining us. As always, at Opal, we shine brighter together, and we'll see you next time.